Did you know that Warframe has had game modes in the past that have been removed and are no longer available anymore? Good evening, this is the Urban Spaceman, and today I'll be showing you 5 game modes in Warframe that you can't play anymore. Well, technically 6, but this one's a bonus one, since by technicality you can still play it, and the first one is Deception. And now the whole gist of this game mode was to collect the data mass and bring it to the objective, destroying it. And that will be the end of the mission. And if that sounds familiar, you've probably already played it. One of the most notable places being Care on Ceres. But it's under the name Sabotage instead of being called Deception, and there are other nodes on the star chart such as Ares and Mars, and Phoebe on Jupiter, that contain the Deception missions. So what happened to this game mode? Well, to me it seems as if Deception just seemed to be a bit too similar to Sabotage missions, and ultimately it was decided that Deception wouldn't be its own unique game mode. At least that's how I think it would have probably went down. And hey, you can also access a tutorial of the Deception game mode in the Codex. Now into the next one, and the reason I placed this one so high up was because it was one of the more recent departures of a niche but loved game mode known as raids. Wait, sorry, I can't use that since, spoiler, there was a completely different game mode called Raid, but we'll call them by their actual name, Trials. Now, I have some very bad history with these, which I won't go into unless all of you type peer pressure in the comments below. Maybe I'll do it, maybe. But Trials were 8-player experiences where you would go through certain puzzle-like rooms which required cooperation to complete. There were 2 unique trials, Law of Retribution being the most popular and the Jorda's Verdict, with 2 varying difficulties, Normal and Nightmare mode. These keys had to be crafted to access them, and would take a while to craft. This is also where Arcanes originally dropped. You could only get 1 a day, but that only added to their rarity. The reason for its removal seemed to be because it just didn't fit the gameplay. It was vastly different to what Warframe regularly was, and took away developer resources, which that reasoning doesn't make too much sense, because of the countless game modes that are still in the game and that experiment with Warframe's base gameplay, but don't quite hit the mark. Now, can any of you imagine a time where Warframe didn't have survival, but instead had something a lot different in its place? The reason I say this is because long survivals are considered to be endgame at the moment. Not the best endgame, but it's something to push your builds, I suppose. Well, yes, instead of survival, we have the aforementioned raids, which are very simple. Very simple. You go into a mission, you collect an artifact, and then you extract. Really that simple. And one of the questions that's running through my head at the moment is why exactly did he decide to replace this game mode with survival of all things? A small discrepancy of mine, but running into a mission and collecting an artifact is a lot different than fighting off enemies and waiting for life support to survive, but I digress. It's a rather simple game mode, and its premise was reused for other missions such as Maru's Iatan treasure missions, which add in a time challenge into the mix. And even though there's no proof to support this on the Warframe wiki, there may be a way to have this become a secondary objective. So if there is a way, you can still technically play it, but I would have no clue on how to access it, and if I did find out, I'll make a video on it. The prizes were subpar, to say the least, with some highlights being 1 Banshee part and the Omni ammo box, which, fun fact, was made unpurchasable in Update 10, which was around the time that Survival was introduced. The Omni ammo box can still be obtained though through capture missions with, get this, a 0.34% chance of dropping. And expect Update 10 to become a running theme within this video. I think the reason for its removal was because of how basic it was. It didn't deserve to be its own individual game mode, and the rewards were random, so there was really no reason to run this anyways. And the rewards, let's not even talk about them. Now, for the rest of the list, we'll be looking at a rather interesting aspect of Warframe, one I've not covered on this channel at all, and a subject that hardly gets brought up for a very good reason: PvP. Now, PvP and Warframe have always had a weird history together. At heart, Warframe is a PvE game that is all about the power fantasy, so balance in PvP would in turn make Warframe a neutered version of itself However, one idea that seemed genuinely fun were solo rail conflicts. These are pretty much all-out wars and dark sector missions between two factions, which of course include real people. The way it works is that a clan can construct a solo rail to initiate attack on that dark sector as long as another solo rail is present and another clan is guarding it. A 12-hour period would occur, called the Tenno conflict, and players would opt into battle in a PvP environment against or with the opposing side. The attacking faction's objective would be similar to a sabotage, whereas the defending faction's objective would be similar to, well, defense. The attacking side would have 20 revives in total and would lose the battle if those revives were to run out. If the attacking side destroys the core, much like the Acolytes or the Fomorian Razorback events, the solo rail would lose health. The more battles that are lost, the more health it loses, but for a successful takeover, it must be done within 12 hours. If by the time that the solo rail that was present is being attacked still has health and is not destroyed, then it shall be put in a state called armistice, if I said that correctly, where for at least 48 hours no further conflicts can occur. Balance and PvP are needed to sustain any form of combat and keep players playing, and the way this was handled in solo rail conflicts was unorthodox to say the least, but really interesting. I say that about everything, don't I? All your gear would be unranked, and the way you ranked them up in this game mode was to kill players. Every kill would bring you a step closer in unlocking your mods, which would unlock in the order you placed them in. This system of course awards those who know what they are doing, but can't really be called true balance. This mode goes a lot more deeper, and I could make a separate video all about this, going over everything it has to offer, but one last thing I will say about it is that you have the option to make something called a regiment of spectres for all different types, which would bolster your defences in a solo rail conflict, so there were PvP elements implemented as well. But as you know, if you try and craft, say, a solo rail or a regiment, you can't in the Orkin Lab, since the whole system is in a state of, and I hope I get this right, armistice. I probably got that wrong. Ambition is probably the main reason this game mode was removed and forgotten. These large-scale battles seem good in paper, but this was even before my time in Warframe, so it must have not been in the best state considering Warframe's track record sometimes. I love the game, don't get me wrong, but it can be a buggy nightmare sometimes, I'm not gonna lie. And some can argue that PvP and Warframe don't mix at all, which to an extent I will agree with, in its current form, but there is potential here to make something that includes PvP, but isn't an unfocused and imbalanced mess like Conclave is, and I know I'll get dislikes from all you Conclave enthusiasts out there. All 5 of you. I may be wrong with this assumption, since I never got the chance to play it myself, and this is one of those game modes that just looks so fantastic that I would have loved to play it when it came out, but unfortunately I'll never fully know the answer to this. And speaking of Conclave, before it was what we know today, it worked a lot differently, and went under the name Versus. This was implemented in Update 10, which still continues to be a recurring theme in this list. Versus was similar to the clan dojo dueling system we have today, but were accessed by individual nodes, much like regular missions across the star chart. However, accessing these required a certain level of Conclave rating, with Venus being the first you can enter. You could choose 1v1, 1v2, and 2v2 game modes. And another thing to note, there were also no restrictions on what weapons and frames you could have equipped, and the icing on top is that one of the bugs was that if Excalibur uses radio blind just before he dies, the enemy team stays permanently blinded as long as they were affected. So, you know, if that isn't a game-breaking issue, I have no clue what is. In the end, Conclave we have now took over in Update 16. Why? Well, let's be honest with ourselves, this is a confusing mess. I mean, it's simple to understand, but it's just inefficient to have PvP nodes amongst all of the PvE missions that are available. That having a central hub would streamline the entire process. And yeah, Conclave improved this in every way, shape and form. Too bad it's still terrible. However, we're not done yet. A version of this was leaked in hotfix 9.8.3. That's a bloody mouthful. Accidentally, of course, which leads us onto our final entry, 2v2 PvP. Yeah, they didn't really have a good naming scheme for this one. That's because it was leaked. Now, this one is interesting because it's one of the only instances I know of where moderators on the Warframe forums actively tried to cover up its existence, which is mainly why this is at number 1. So what was 2v2 PvP anyways? Well, it was similar to the dojo duels, however, much like the version of Conclave we went over, there were dedicated mission nodes across the star chart. The mission type that 2v2 PvP used was the Colosseum with, get this, only 2 nodes across the star chart, to our knowledge at least. And it wasn't even publicly stated where and how to access them, but people knew about it somehow. I don't think there's any explanation for that, players will know these things eventually. Accessing these nodes, however, was a bit unorthodox. The only 2 nodes that had access to this mode were Lares on Mercury and Fossa on Venus. To access them, you hover your cursor over these nodes, then press A or the left arrow key, and then start the mission by pressing enter. Yep, a very specific way to enter a game mode, but alright. And if you're expecting balance to be better than Conclave, then get ready for a shocker. It's far worse. And to be honest, I can't fault DE. I mean, this was the first step into PvP, so of course it's going to be rough. And still is to this day. But unlike nowadays where weapons and Warframes have dedicated Conclave mods, which are a form of balance I suppose, those didn't exist back in this era. So you could use your weapons and Warframes with any mods at full power. So you know what that means? Any match could be over in an instant. And you could also be downed and revived by your teammate, which makes absolutely no sense because your teammate would more than likely be killed. So balance is pretty much non-existent in this game mode. Interestingly enough, the menu that this game mode used was the Evolution Engine's menu itself, and if you clicked on Secrets, you'd get one hell of a secret. You'd get a little taste of what a soft lock tastes like. Now onto the moderators. Not much is known about the moderators on the forum actively trying to censor the existence of this game mode, but it's certainly not continuing to this day, since there is a post in the forums that hasn't been removed. And you may be wondering, how do we know about this game mode then? Well, the moderators don't control the likes of YouTube and the Warframe wiki, and with the nature of the internet, nothing can truly be covered up. So I think it was a fruitless effort on their part trying to cover that up. Who were they and what were their goals? I don't know. That's just another mystery in and of itself. So, this has been the Urban Spaceman. Like if you liked the video, tell me what you thought in the comments below. Subscribe and turn on that notification bell to be called to action whenever I upload, and become one of the Conscious Zone. I'll catch you all in the next video.